Hello and welcome to Good Nightmare, a podcast where today I'm going to give you the content warning right up the top as usual. This episode is very emotional and does include the death of 3 children. While here at Good Nightmare, I tend to avoid anything too emotional. I'm including this episode because it's a story that I was told in my childhood, one that my mother was told in hers, and so on. If you grew up in Melbourne, like I did, you've probably visited Daylesford a few times. My great aunts live up there, and so as kids, it seemed as though it was our second home. I have plenty of memories of sleepovers and adventures in Daylesford, otherwise going camping. It still feels like a place of comfort and familiarity, even though it's changed so much since I was a child. It's not the fancy new cafes and galleries that keep me coming back, although I do love Paradise Bookstore. That's one of my favourites, and if you get a chance to visit, I highly recommend it. And aside from visiting family, it's the history and the secret places we found as kids that keep me coming back. For example, if you know where to go, there's a natural ice-cold ground spring in someone's backyard, and you're allowed to wander in and drink from it or fill your bottle. But you have to look out for the goat that lives in that yard, because while you're bent over filling up your bottle, it's not unlikely that you'll hear the little tap-tap of hooves as he comes to butt you and bowl you over. Then there's the old cart track in the gardens. If you walk in it in spring and veer off into the little path that leads down to Cliffy's, you're likely to be pelted with seed pods by the cockatoos that hide up in the trees just waiting for someone to wander by. These are the same gardens where you can sit at the base of a willow tree and be surrounded by its branches, as though you're in the home of a fairy. There's also the fern garden, where my sister and I used to play Lost Boys, like in Peter Pan. We called it our secret garden. Our dad would tell us we were invisible in there, and we'd sneak up and try to scare our mum, thinking that she couldn't see us. It's a place where I never lose that sense of wonder. And as soon as I step foot in the fern garden, I'm a lost boy again. There's the market, where we first tried Dutch pancakes and sat on the old train for a ride on the tracks, just like when it was first installed. There's Hepburn Springs nearby, where we would take our tin cups and dare each other to drink from the sulphur spring, which smelt like old eggs and tasted like copper. And lastly, in the context of my childhood memories at least, there's the cemetery. If you visited the cemetery, you've likely seen the sculpture that stands over the graves of 3 children. The lost children. Today I will tell you the story as it was told to me and my sister by our mum, who was told by her parents and aunts, and back to the very day that it occurred. In 1867, 3 young boys went exploring, just as my sister and I would over a century later. While they were out on their adventure, traipsing through the wilderness in what was then a much smaller town, the weather took a turn for the worse. The boys found themselves lost and unable to get home, so they took shelter for the night in the hollow of a tall tree. When the boys didn't come home that night, the entire town went out to search for them, around the town and in surrounding land, but they had no success. The land at this time was wild. It was easy to get lost. And the boys were lost to the people of Daylesford and to their families. It wasn't until months later that they were found when a dog brought back a clue. The people of Daylesford set out to search once again, this time with success. The boys' bodies were found. The 2 smallest children had been found inside the hollow of the tree, likely staying close for warmth, while the eldest was found just outside, possibly looking out for someone to take them home. The children had died that night, of the cold, it was thought, the very night that they were lost. Compounding the tragedy was the new knowledge that the search parties had been within walking distance of the children. They were a short walk from the city centre, where they would have found safety, but the children had been unable to see where they were, how close to home, through the storm and the trees and the wilderness. The tree is no longer standing. It fell naturally. However, the statue that I mentioned earlier was erected in memoriam over their graves. The children are buried side by side as they were found. Driving through to the gardens, there's another statue dedicated to the memory of the lost children. In an article by Chris McLennan, published online for the Weekly Times in 2014, family of the townspeople of that era recalled the disappearance. Several people had seen the boys that night, the night they went missing, and had advised them of the direction home. The boys didn't seem worried, as the weather hadn't turned and they knew that there was help should they need it. During the search, the town was entirely shut down until the boys could be found, opening only for a short time on a Friday to allow people to access whatever they might need, before being shut down again. Over 1,000 people came to the town in search for the children, and later over 1,000 people attended their funeral. There's a 16-kilometre walking track that people may follow to see where the children walked that day and where they spent their final hours. If you've grown up in the bush, camping or visiting, metal detecting, panning, you'll understand entirely how easy it is to become lost only minutes from home. How easy it is to be turned around. When we used to go camping, usually on Easter holidays, I remember seeing more than 2 or perhaps 3 graves of children or unknown persons who had become lost in the bush, their bodies found at a later date and buried, out of respect. This story still affects the people of Daylesford, even myself, my mum, my sister and my aunts. It's one I think about every time I visit. And in childhood, my sister and I would always ask to visit the lost children and to hear their story, no matter how many times we'd heard it before. This tragedy that rocked a town in the 1800s is not one I can ever imagine being lost in time. When the next generation arrives and is old enough to visit and understand, we'll likely tell them the same story, and so on throughout the years. If you have a local story, whether a ghost story or a tragedy in your town that occurred, perhaps something a little less emotionally daunting, email me at goodnightmare_s@outlook.com. You can let me know in the email if you'd like your story read out. I can do this anonymously or with a shout out. It's totally up to you. I love hearing from my listeners, and I've actually been able to make 2 really great connections, friendship-wise, through email recently. So please don't be shy about getting in contact. It's never a bother. It's actually a pleasure for me to hear from you. You can also send through any case suggestions or topics that you'd like to hear on the show. You can catch me on social media on Twitter or Instagram at goodnightmare_s or via email at goodnightmare_s@outlook.com. As always, thank you so much for listening. Until next time, sweet dreams.